You know, I heard recently of a pastoral search committee. You know what those are? When churches need a pastor and they send out a committee and they return a report to the pastor and the board. And it goes like this: in our church's search for a suitable pastor, the following working document was developed for your perusal. Of the candidates investigated by the committee, only one was found to have the necessary qualities. The list contains the names of candidates and comments on each, should you be interested in investigating them further for future pastoral placements. The first, Noah. He has 120 years of preaching experience, but no converts to speak of. Moses, he stutters, and his former congregation says he spends far too much time talking about the law and tithing. He also loses his temper over trivial things like murder. Abraham, we interviewed. He left home, took off to Egypt during hard times. We heard that he got into trouble with the authorities and then tried to lie and manipulate his way out of the situation. David, unacceptable moral character. He might well have been considered for minister of music had he not fallen into adultery. Solomon has a reputation for wisdom, but fails to practice what he preaches, especially when it comes to women. Elijah, he presented well, but proved to be inconsistent at times and is known to fold under pressure. He also suffers from great depression. Hosea, his family life is in shambles. He even divorced and remarried to a prostitute and then told us God told him to do it. Jeremiah, he preaches well, but he's too emotional. He's a bit of an alarmist. Some thought he was a real pain in the neck. Amos comes from a farming background and certainly lacks any formal theological training. Better off keeping his day job picking figs. John, he says he's a Baptist, but acts more like a Republican. He lacks civility and dresses like a hippie. He eats unorthodox food and will not fit in well at church potluck dinners. May be highly offensive to the congregation as a whole. Peter, bad temper, rash, impulsive, was heard to have even denied Christ publicly. Paul, we found him to be enthusiastic, but also to lack tact. He's too harsh. His appearance is contemptible. Most of the topics he speaks on are either too complex or too controversial. He preaches far too long and uses run-on sentences. He is quite focused on what he calls other missions. Timothy has potential, but he's too young for the position. Then this fellow Jesus, he tends to offend church members with his preaching, especially leaders. He's reported to have physically removed the elders at one church he visited. He's somewhat controversial, claiming personal authority in settling all issues. He even offended the search committee with his pointed questions and comments about their personal lives. Judas. Now, he seemed very practical, cooperative, inoffensive. He's good with money, politically savvy. He's able to work quietly behind the scenes, cares for the poor, dresses well, and is a good kisser. We all agree that he is just the man we're looking for to fill the vacancy as our senior pastor. Thank you for all you've done in assisting us with our pastoral search. Signed, Pastoral Search Committee Chairman. I found that to be interesting. Maybe only a little funny, but I thought it was cool. I didn't write it. The people who lived through the Bible and Bible times has been the subject of our new series. And famous figures, as well as known figures, will surface as you would expect. Basically, the heroes of the Bible. But occasionally, we'll slow down and hopefully pick up the stories and perhaps the untold stories of people whose names are not as well known, even those that are unnamed. And we may not be familiar with them, but they are still foundational to the people of the Bible and the people that lived what we are expected. Pick up right where Craig left off last week in Genesis 4:17. And this is right after Cain killed Abel. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. And to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mehujael, and Mehujael begot Methujael, and Methujael begot Lamech. Now, after the drama of Cain and Abel, things kind of speed up as civilization moves forward. And there is a sense that things are picking up. But they are still, the people, named. We won't know them till we get to heaven, but you'll see in a lot of these passages as we move on, this lineage that seems to be very important to God for us to know. Now, typically, Bible teachers, we just skip over that stuff, mostly because the names are hard to pronounce. And it makes us look stupid if we can't pronounce them right. And even if we pronounce them wrong, we know you won't go check. So, just a little secret there. And if you are following along with this, it is guessed that, or presupposed that there's about 500 people on the earth at this time. Now, this is a little hard to picture, but I've said this before, someone had to be first. And it doesn't tell us in the Bible, nor do even evolutionists believe that suddenly thousands of people appeared on the beach out of the primordial ooze, right? So someone had to be first, second, third, fourth, 100, 200, 300, 400. So, you know, for all intents and purposes, this population grew, and from a Christian standpoint, God said, be fruitful. And then those ages dropping off. Two wives, the name of one was Ada, and the name of the second was Zillah. Now, Lamech was the first bigamist in history, a notable title, the very first. And he had the arrogance before God to go along with this bold step to marry two wives. Now, this is before Moses would address these issues in the law of Moses. Many of these things that are happening now are pre-Moses. And that's one of the reasons why we start in the very, very beginning and kind of give you a timeline here, is that the laws of the land had not been addressed because Moses isn't here yet. And so Lamech stands as sort of an unusual person that's kind of making the law as he goes. But he's important because he's the father of some interesting people, which have an interesting, I think, an interesting, not only just a role, but a model for what was to come. So in my mind, these are big names. And Ada bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and livestock. Now, this is the beginning of skill development and human gifting as recorded in the Bible. And again, you picture sort of a rapid advancement in history. And we see succeeding generations that will quickly progress as the world populates. Now, this is still prior to the flood. We're still on the same page? So something's going on here, and God appears to give these gifts and natural talents to people through people. So Jabal was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock, which means he had an interest, a skill, a talent to do certain things. This is important to understand because a lot of times people don't really understand why they're here on the planet. Wouldn't that be a nice answer to have? You ever ask that? Why am I here? What for? And I think many times you can find it in your gifting, spiritual gifting, and natural aptitudes and natural tendencies because they come from God, part of his plan. And they're also flawed, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to figure out who you are sometimes and what you're for. But understand that this guy who dwelt in tents and dealt with animals was part of God's plan. And so we have these farms, regions, and people developing. Again, someone had to be first. Someone had to be the first thinker. Some group had to be, some family had to be the first inventors. They were part of God's plan for humans, innovators, engineers, builders. They came first before priests. Hello? Now we're in order here, and these people are before there's a priesthood, before there's sacrifice, before there's anything. So right there in the middle of early creation, you have God beginning to give and develop people's skills. And it's important because sometimes people think religion comes first. No, people come first. You have to be a person to have faith. You have to have people to have church. And you have to have people who are different, who are varied in their gifts and talents. And so all the weirdness that people represent is part of God's plan. And so God is starting to create variety in humans and their giftings and aptitudes and talents. And so you hear and see that there are people that work with their hands in different fields of learning and life, and they're quickly developing natural talents. Now, we've been calling natural talents gifts for a long time. We'll refer to someone as, oh, that's such a gifted individual. Haven't you? Oh, that person's so gifted. And a lot of the times, God doesn't get the due credit. Oh, the person's gifted. We don't necessarily know how or why. We wonder if it's genetics. We wonder if it's, a great piano teacher or guitar teacher or painter or whatever. But understand that as far back as history goes, God has something to do with this. Natural talents, or the gifted people, or people we often call prodigies in some talent and skill. Isn't it fascinating when you watch some of the talent shows, those that have a gift, that are gifted with a voice, for instance? Some of you have envied people that can sing, and you can't carry a tune in 2 buckets, let alone 1. You're afraid to worship because you're afraid someone will hear you. I have a suggestion. It's just a hint. Sit in the front row. No one will hear you except us, and we don't care as long as you're worshiping the Lord. So you're exposing your singlessness to the right people. So if you don't like the way your voice sounds, sit up in the front row, and we'll have compassion for you. And we'll love you instead of that. So Jabal is associated, and it says he's the father of, we'll get to that in a minute, those that are associated with animals and dwelling marketplace materials. And so here's a guy that's primarily working with food and animals and cattle and the beasts of the field that Adam had taken care of and made sure were raised properly. And Jabel's the one who's responsible for turning it into food. He's probably the inventor of barbecue. So this afternoon and tomorrow, as you are grilling, be thankful to Jabel because he started the whole thing. And he was very skilled. He's very good at it. And he also, after obviously killing an animal, preparing it as food, you've got the skin left. And it makes sense that his dealing with animals and dealing with their skins and hides would fit into tent making. They're laying there. He puts a couple of sticks under them, and voila, you have home. In your own cable show. Flipping skins. So he invented camping. We know in later life that he founded REI, Cabela's, and Bass Pro, all at the same time. So you got Jabel. Now he has a full brother, and his full brother's name is Jubal, and it says he was the father of all those who play the harp and the flute, the first musician. And so Jubal, after Jabal was done with the animals, would I think obviously see the guts with the skins. And do you all know that all strings back in early history were made of cat gut or animal gut? Well, somebody thought that up, and I think Jubal did. His brother's done with the animals, and here's the gut pile, and he plays in the gut pile, like all little boys would like to do. And pretty soon he stretches one out, it gets dried out, and boom, 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 boom. You've got the first bass guitar that Dave ever played. Well, doesn't it make sense? Now, the problem is to make a flute or a harp. Now, the harp makes sense because if one string works, and another piece of gut will work. And then you got two strings, and then you got three. This man is an innovator. He's brilliant in his own way. But he's got a weird job. His weird job is after Jabal gets done with the animals, he plays with the guts and then finds hollow sticks and makes holes in them for the flute. So can you imagine the thoughts that his brothers would have? We're hard at work, and he's playing with sticks and animal guts, making holes for flutes. But any of you know that any wind instrument today comes from holes in a piece of wood, or in Brian's case, several pieces of metal. Right? That silver one right there in the middle has holes in it. You can trace that sucker back to who? Jubal. It's as simple as that. I think also he was accused of playing music by his hard-working, resentful brothers, and that is a curse for musicians that would endure throughout human history, even till now. We don't work, we play. Because Jubal. And as for Zillah, she also bore Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. We've got fathers, and now Tubal-Cain is an instructor. Now, these are predecessors. And do you know that everybody with a talent or a craft has a predecessor and hopefully a mentor or an instructor in their life? Some of you, even as I speak about music or speak about skills or crafts, you can sit and wish that, I wish I'd continued to take Spanish. I wish I'd have played music. I wish I'd have kept taking lessons. And that's because part of God's plan is predecessors, instructors, and people skilled in these areas that teach. So you have a multiply skilled teacher is now on the scene, because a craftsman, in every craftsman in bronze and iron, now you can only imagine, but every craftsman indicates hard study and probably a lot of innovation and experimentation. Well, how did it happen? Well, maybe Jabal made a campfire, and in the morning, one of the rocks had melted into a metallic material. And Tubal-Cain looks around and goes, wow, I wonder if any of the other ones melt at a higher heat. Or I wonder about this. I wonder what happens if you mix them. I wonder if they harden differently, and so on and so on and so forth. And you have a skilled craftsman instructing people. Now, they call this the biblical Iron Age, or the giving of common graces, skills, aptitudes, and talents. They had to come from somewhere, and they came from God. They didn't come out of the primordial ooze. Do you understand that? If you have any giftedness, any aptitude at all, or appreciate someone else's, it came from God, and God needs credit, and I might say God needs glory for it. And it is forgotten. So now you've got a skilled teacher who's figuring out how to figure out metallurgy before there was ever a word like that. Now we know that he went on to start Craftsman Tools, Ace Hardware, and Sears later in his life. I find it interesting that in the two cases, the Bible calls them fathers of these skills. Someone nurtured, encouraged, and corrected these skills along the way. Now, the reason why this is important, because you might be asking, because these aren't heroes of the Bible, are they? Way. These little people who aren't heroes of the Bible are critically important. And we're going to see their father's attitude here in a moment. But the ones that were born to Lamech, we're going to see as a bad guy here in a minute. But these fathers of these different areas are those that encouraged and developed these skills. Did you know that apprenticeship is a lost art in American society today? Because we're so used to just sending people off to school that apprenticeship may or may not happen. Apprenticeship is hands-on training versus education. It doesn't have to be against education, but hands-on internship, hands-on apprenticeship is critically important because people don't necessarily learn to do something just because of information. Any single skill, you got to practice 10,000 hours. The people that often downplay the skill of music don't realize that most who play proficiently literally have tens of thousands of hours practicing where no one's listening. And it's the same way with other crafts and skills, whether it's woodworking or engineering or many of the technologies we have have today. There's kind of a trade school mentality where you find someone younger of interest and you train them. When I was 9 years old, I grew up for a while. I grew up across the street. Anybody know what Knott's Berry Farm is out in Southern California? It's kind of an Old West kind of setting. And now it's a theme park that costs money to get into. But when I was growing up, about 8 or 9 years old, there was no cost to get in. There was no tickets. And so you had this spread where they would have Western shows, and they had a wagon wheel kind of wagon train set up where there was entertainment. and different things. But my favorite place to go was to the livery stable, where a guy worked all day demonstrating, working with making horseshoes and making farm tools. And he had a good old-fashioned set of billows and heated up the iron until it was red and then pounded it into shape. And when you're a 9-year-old in the summer, you don't have a whole lot to do. And I used to sit and watch him for hours, and he'd just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And I was just fascinated watching him take that red-hot iron and pound it into shapes that I could not even imagine. And he was kind of there as a showman, but I think the reason he liked having me around so much is that in him, deeply in him, was the need to apprentice someone. And I feel like that I was the fruit of that need in his life, because I'd come back and his eyes would light up and I'd sit in my normal seat and sit there literally for 4 and 5 hours a day and just watch him work and watch him work. I think it's a lost art today. The other thing about the parenting nature of this text, the fathers of those that, a skilled instructor in all the craftsmen. You know, again, history at this point in the Bible is picking up a pace where families, regions, a bad news thread through it. But I believe as parents, we have the duty to give our children opportunities in art, in education, sports, crafts, music, just to see what God has given them. And they might not land the first opportunity they get. Some of you have experienced this. Some of you want your kids to do something that they don't want to do. I coached Little League football for quite some time when my son was that age. And I would love to him to play football. Right up until I coached for 5 years. Now, I don't think any kid should play football, but that's another story. Our little quarterback, after his 3rd concussion at age 12, I told his parents, enough. That's another side of the story. But as a young father with a son, you know, our youngest, and he happened to one year be wearing 77, which was my friend Carl Mecklenburg's number when I worked with the Broncos. And I think Thomas was about 11, maybe 12. And we were walking downtown, and I saw Carl and his wife Kathy having lunch out on the patio of one of the restaurants down there. And I told Carl, I said, hey, Thomas is wearing your number. And Carl is a football player's football player, believe me, when he played. Very hard-hitting, all-pro. And I didn't expect him to turn and address Thomas. It was just me and my young son, and we were kind of trying to move along because I know they were busy eating. And he reaches out and he kind of touches Thomas on the arm and says, Thomas, do you like to hit? Now, Carl's a pretty assuming man, size-wise. And Thomas, he kind of looks at me like, is it okay to talk to him? Is this guy okay? Am I safe? I nodded, and I said, this is my friend. And he said again, Thomas, do you like to hit? Thomas says, now he has eye contact. He said, do you like to hit a person so hard that they crush under the pressure of your body? Do you like to feel them fold under the forcefulness? And he went on like that for quite a while, and my son has got eyes like this, and of course, Carl's just being Carl. You don't play that position as a professional without enjoying it. Do you know what I mean? Now, we're walking away from this, and we're about halfway through the intersection. The light's green, and Thomas looks at me and tugs on my arm and says, Dad, I don't think I like to hit. And I thought, well, that's okay. That's fine. Because having been around the pros, I knew what it would take just from your internal motivation to play that particular game. And I was smart enough at that time to let off the pressure and to not hound him to be something he did not want to be. See, all we can do is give our kids opportunities. The rest is up to them. And we don't superimpose what we want. We just nurture and give them the opportunities. If one opportunity isn't the right opportunity, give them another one and give them another. I think that's what fathering skills and fathering God's gifts and what instructing and teaching and mentoring is about. Is helping someone come along when they know what they want and you know what it is they want better than them and you teach them. That's the great thing about me mentoring and teaching is you bring someone up to your level. There is a point where they exceed your level and then you're no longer the mentor. Sometimes you become the student. But these are the relationships, and this is the dynamic, the human dynamic that God put in the world way back in Genesis 4. Do you understand? He's still working that dynamic today. And God doesn't get enough credit for it. And we don't look to him. Then Lamech said to his wives, and here comes Mr. Problem, the dad. Not Jubal and Jabal, who were the fathers. Don't get lost here. And Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Hear the attitude? Come on over here, woman. Hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Listen to my speech. For I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. And if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Now, we don't know what this outburst was caused by, but it is a powerful couple of sentences. He is arrogant, number one, about his accomplishments. Probably arrogant about his son's accomplishments. Sometimes we put too much weight on the accomplishments of their children. We want to take credit for it. I think it's okay to be proud. I mean, you can put the bumper stickers, I'm the mother of and father of a student that goes to wherever. That's okay. But make sure God gets some credit for giving the gifts and the talents and the intellect in the first place. Just get it in order. Who comes first? We all have our influence, but to God gets the glory. Now, old Lamech here is taking ultimate authority from God, which is what? Vengeance and judgment. Or let's turn it around, judgment and vengeance. Either way you look at it, this guy has an attitude, and this is the attitude of the man who would be the first, the birthplace of Canaanite civilization. Violent, wanton destruction of human life by one who proclaims his complete independence from God and taken vengeance and judgment into his own hands. He was proud that he could deliver greater judgment than God. Now, he's aware of God, and he's aware of God's judgment because he quotes the judgment on Cain. Correct? He's very aware. It's a family member. He knows what Cain did, but he's making himself, in his arrogance, that much more important. But Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, and Lamech 77-fold. Whoa. This guy's self-worth is a little off the scale. He proudly claims to be master of his own destiny. He's thinking that he and his sons, perhaps by their own achievements, would redeem themselves from the curse that came to the entire line of Cain. Now, again, realize what's happening is this is civilization being built that God created prior to the flood, when God would destroy it. What's important? Well, why didn't Genesis just start with Noah? You got all this detail here about these throwaway people. They'd be drowning and floating somewhere. But all this detail about a whole bunch of people God would bring under judgment. But you have to understand what grows that kind of sinfulness, what grows that kind of evil, so that you can watch for it in your own life. And so you can take note of it in our own society. Because if any of this is starting to remind you of the good old US of A right now in its deterioration, this should. The Canaanite civilization would be problematic for the nation of Israel throughout their history. And what this attitude represents, what Lamech displays, that attitude will occupy most of the Old Testament as God deals with it, both as the enemies of Israel and in Israel itself. The civilization was angry, violent, proud, and vengeful. All of the time having such elements as agriculture, industry, arts, building great cities, religions, false gods, the true God, all of it without faith in God. And all of it without faith in Jesus Christ, which we have the privilege of owning today. Much like today's society, all this pride and power, what happened to it? Now, okay, we have then the flood, which is coming. We're going to talk about Noah. Then you have the next civilization, the next bits and pieces of history. And for Lamech, it all comes to naught. Lamech, with all his power and all of his pride, is forgotten. At the end of this verse, he's gone, never to be mentioned in the Bible again. When we get to Abraham, there's 20 chapters on Abraham. So godly people are not forgotten. But evidently, God wants us to understand something about this kind of arrogance and pride. Lamech seemed to be very proud about the knowledge that his son had gathered in all of these areas of civilization. From art, agriculture, you follow what I'm saying? There's such an arrogance. You see any of that arrogance today? You ever notice the bite out of the apple and the Macintosh logo? It represents the forbidden fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. We are proud and we are arrogant, and everything owns a Mac. But do you see the arrogance in that? We'll take the bite out of the apple. We'll be the most knowledgeable, and we are. Look at how proud we are. All the technology and all the things that we can do and all the stuff that you buy that you can't figure out, so it stays in the box on the shelf till you can re-gift it at Christmas. Here's the dark side of that. Just in the same way that God brought it in so meticulously. Revelation 18, when God finally deals with the earth, finally deals with the arrogance of his creation again, which he calls the great city of Babylon. He says in Revelation 18, and this is interesting, then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found anymore, the world as we know it. Now here's the kicker. The sound of the harpists, musicians, flutes, and trumpeters shall not be heard any more in you. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more. The sound of a millstone, meaning agriculture, shall not be heard in you anymore, and the light of a lamp shall not shine in you anymore, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride shall not be heard anymore. Now, what that tells you, as clear as you can see it, is that God brought the gifts and talents and attributes into the world, and he'll take them out. And there's nothing in between except you're giving glory to what God has given you. First of all, honoring that God has given it. So many people ignore what God has given because they think it's not worth anything. It'd be like the person, well, I'm just a farmer. Except God created. He put that skill in the earth a long time ago. I'm just a lowly musician. Well, God did. God. We have separated so many things away from God. It's interesting that the voice of the bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you anymore. We have so destroyed in our society the sacred unity of marriage that it won't even be recognizable. So God said, I gave it to you as a sacred union, and you've completely distorted it. Now I'll just take it out. Okay, well, just because they didn't appear in your lifetime doesn't mean God went away. Apparently, universal gifts to mankind are so close to God's heart, so serious, that he brought them in and he takes them out in one fell swoop. See, marriage is a gift. Sex is a gift. Skills are a gift. And we have the choice of abusing them, using them, dishonoring God in them, and that happens every single day. You just take music, for instance. Once sent musicians ahead of the army, presumably to inspire the warriors. Music has changed cultures. Electric guitars, I think, rerouted the rock and roll generation and influenced their cultural values. Some have used their gifts to worship false gods. Some have used their gifts to worship and glorify the true God. But general gifting to humans, like craftsmanship, science, sex, mathematical genius, can be used or abused, made fruitful or unfruitful. Now, how does this apply to me? Okay, I don't know what you do or what you're good at or what you think you're not good at. We talk a lot about discovering and developing spiritual gifts. Some of you have life gifts and natural gifts that you've not discovered and developed. I think that's important to God too. Because what do you do with most of your life? Well, we have our times of worship and we have our times of study, but we don't live in monasteries, do we? Where it's 24 hours. You are in the world, but not of the world. So perhaps it's a matter of you understanding that if you feel like you're just a useless slave doing what you do in this flawed and deteriorating culture, I've got some sound advice for you to close with. Because you're all doing something, right? Right? You're all doing something during the week. Maybe sitting and doing nothing, but that's something. It's a nothing something, but it's something, even though it's nothing. I'll have to listen back to the tape to know what I said. But here's the close. Colossians 3:22. Bondservants, obey, because you are slaves to this world, either to the Lord or to this world. But bondservants, obey in all things your masters, according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. That means whatever you're doing, fearing God, which means recognizing and valuing the God factor in the human gifts and talents that God's given you. Some of you have not realized or valued that God's put you here for a reason. Yes, he's put you here to worship. Yes, he's put you here to study. Yes, he's put you here for spiritual reasons, but he's put you here on this earth to be a fruitful citizen, to be a thinker, to be creative. And we've so abandoned so much of that because we're not fearing God. Knowing the God of the universe has placed you here is very important. It really is. In verse 23 of Colossians 3, and whatever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord and not men. That's the takeaway. You're all doing something at some level of skill or not. But whatever you're doing, there's a song that I like that it's called Good for Nothing, and part of the lyric is, if I'm good for nothing, I aim to do it well. But whatever you do, do it as unto the Lord. That will change your attitude in so many areas, knowing that God brought skills and craftsmen into the world, brought artists into the world, and he'll take them out when he's done with them. So you might as well enjoy it in between, because I got a guarantee here, Jesus will come back, and Great Babylon will go away. So in this between time, do all things as unto the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. What inheritance? Jesus is coming back. You will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. You do. Say it with me. You serve the Lord Christ. I serve the Lord Christ. You may think you're just one of the little people, a part of the bigger group, but we're part of a much larger group called the Church of Jesus Christ. And unfortunately, the Church of Jesus Christ, and this is a subject for future study coming up soon, we're being assimilated into the culture every single day. In our struggle to be so relevant as Christians, we just hide. We put the bushel basket over our light. And the church is being assimilated, like the Borg Collective. That's a reference to Star Trek, in case you know, our identity as Christians has grown meaningless among many Christians today. That identity, that force, that drive to do what we do as unto the Lord. My only point is, may it not be so among you. Not in this church. Amen. That's all she wrote this morning. Let's pray. Lord, we ask for courage in today's culture and society. We can talk and talk and talk about our identity in you, Jesus. But where the rubber meets the road, we have to act like it. We have to do what we do, recognizing that you are the Father of our gifts, recognizing that the people you've placed in our lives, our teachers, our protectors, our mentors, are all there and have been there to increase our abilities and attributes and talents on this earth. We pray, Lord, that we would see their importance, but see your importance above all. And Lord, give us the courage, give us the ability to stand and do all things as unto you. In Jesus' name.